There are places on Earth where the boundary between the physical and the spiritual seems uncommonly thin, where nature has constructed something so perfect, so unexpected, that encountering it feels less like discovery and more like revelation. Fingal's Cave on the tiny island of Staffa off the western coast of Scotland is such a place. It is a cathedral built not by human hands, but by fire and time, a chamber carved not with tools, but with waves, a space that sings without voice, that resonates without instrument, that inspired one of the 19th century's greatest composers to create music that has become inseparable from the stone itself. To stand at the entrance of Fingal's Cave is to stand at the threshold between worlds. Behind you, the wild Atlantic, waves that have traveled 3,000 miles to crash against this small island's shores. Before you, a cavern that extends into darkness, its walls lined with basalt columns so regular, so geometric, so impossibly perfect that they seem to mock the very idea that nature creates chaos. Above, a vault of stone that catches every sound and transforms it, that takes the crash of waves and the cry of seabirds and weaves them into something approaching music. The air itself seems different here, heavy with moisture and history, carrying the salt of the sea and something else, something harder to name. A sense of deep time, of processes so slow and so vast that human lifespans become less than eye blinks in comparison. The columns rise from the water like organ pipes, like the pillars of some impossible temple, hexagonal in cross-section, fitted together with a precision that would challenge the finest mason. They form the walls of the cave, they form the entrance, they form the causeway where visitors can walk, if the weather allows, if the tide cooperates, if fortune and courage align. Each column is slightly different from its neighbors, yet each follows the same underlying pattern, the same geometric imperative written into the cooling lava 60 million years ago. The effect is mesmerizing, hypnotic. Your eye wants to trace the lines, to count the sides, to understand the pattern, but there are too many, too much complexity hiding in apparent simplicity, and eventually thought gives way to simple appreciation, to wonder at nature's ability to create order from molten chaos. But it is not just the visual that overwhelms in Fingal's Cave, it is the sound. Oh, the sound! Every wave that enters the cavern brings with it not just water, but music, not just force, but tone. The cave amplifies, modulates, transforms. What enters as the random crash of surf exits as something more structured, more intentional, more musical. The frequency of the waves, the dimensions of the cave, the material properties of the basalt, they conspire to create a natural resonance chamber, an acoustic space that seems almost designed for the production of sound. And in a sense, it was designed, though the designer was physics, and the design process took millions of years of wave action and erosion, slowly perfecting the dimensions, slowly tuning the space, like some blind cosmic instrument maker crafting an organ of stone and sea. On the 7th of August in 1829, a young German composer stood approximately where you stand now, looked at what you are looking at, heard what you are hearing. His name was Felix Mendelssohn, and he was 20 years old, traveling through Scotland with his friend Karl Klingemann, part of that great tradition of educated young Europeans making their grand tour, seeking inspiration and experience beyond the boundaries of their familiar world. Mendelssohn had already shown prodigious talent. He had conducted Bach's St. Matthew Passion just months earlier, reviving a nearly forgotten masterpiece, proving himself not just a composer, but a musical intellect of the first order. But he was still searching, still developing, still open to the kind of profound experience that shapes an artist's vision for life. What happened to him in this cave changed him, changed music. The experience was so immediate, so visceral, so complete, that within hours he had sketched the opening bars of what would become the Hebrides Overture, known also as Fingal's Cave, one of the most beloved orchestral works of the Romantic era, a piece of music that has introduced millions of listeners to this remote Scottish island that has become so associated with the cave itself that it is nearly impossible to think of one without the other. The cave inspired the music, and the music, in turn, has shaped how the world experiences the cave. They are bound together now, stone and sound, nature and art, place and composition, in a relationship so intimate that separating them would diminish both. This is the story of that cave and that music, of the geological processes that created one and the artistic processes that created the other, of the long history that preceded Mendelssohn's visit and the equally long aftermath, of the pilgrims who came before him and those who have come since, drawn by different things, by scientific curiosity, by aesthetic hunger, by spiritual seeking, by simple wanderlust, but all responding to the same underlying reality, that Fingal's Cave is a place where earth has spoken in a language we can almost understand, where stone has arranged itself into forms that resonate with something deep in human consciousness, where the boundaries between geology and poetry, between physics and music, between the measurable and the meaningful, become beautifully, mysteriously blurred. Let us descend into that cave together. Let us trace its origins back through unimaginable time to when Scotland was a different place, a volcanic landscape, a realm of fire that would cool into the formations we see today. Let us follow the path of visitors across centuries, from ancient Celts to Victorian tourists to modern pilgrims with cameras and waterproof clothing. Let us listen to what the cave itself can tell us about the planet we inhabit and the forces that shape it. And let us examine that extraordinary moment when a young composer stood in this space and heard not just waves and wind, but the opening of a symphony, not just nature, but art waiting to be born, and had the genius to capture it, to translate stone into sound, to transform a geological phenomenon into a musical one, creating something that would endure as long as either cave or memory survives.
The story begins, as so many geological stories do, with fire. But it begins also with isolation, with an island so remote that for centuries it existed on the edge of consciousness, known to locals but invisible to the wider world. A secret kept not through intention but through simple distance, through the challenges of approaching a small exposed rock in one of the stormiest seas on Earth. To understand Fingal's Cave, we must first understand Staffa. And to understand Staffa, we must understand the Hebrides, that scatter of islands off Scotland's western coast that form a boundary between land and ocean, between the familiar and the wild, between the sheltered inner seas and the full fury of the Atlantic beyond. The Hebrides are not one thing, but many, hundreds of islands, most uninhabited, ranging from substantial land masses like Lewis and Harris and Skye to tiny rocks that disappear beneath the waves at high tide. They are arranged in a rough arc, the outer Hebrides forming a barrier to the west, the Inner Hebrides closer to the mainland, and among the Inner Hebrides in the sound between Mull and the smaller islands to the west lies Staffa. It is not large, only about a third of a mile long and less than that wide, perhaps 80 acres total when measured at low tide. It rises from the water with dramatic cliffs, its surface flat or gently rolling, covered in grass during the brief summer, brown and windswept the rest of the year. No one lives there permanently. No one ever has, really. It is too small, too exposed, too difficult to farm or build upon. It exists as it has for millions of years, a remnant of volcanic activity, a piece of the past protruding into the present, waiting to be noticed, to be appreciated, to be transformed by human attention from mere geology into something approaching sacred. The island sits in waters that are often rough, sometimes dangerous. The tides here are complex, the currents strong, the weather notoriously changeable. Fog can roll in without warning, turning familiar waters into dangerous unknowns. Storms from the Atlantic strike with little notice, whipping the sea into frenzy, making any approach impossible. Even in summer, calm days are rare enough to be notable. To reach Staffa requires not just desire, but favorable conditions, not just boat, but timing, not just courage, but humility before forces larger than human will. This difficulty of access is not incidental to the island's story, it is central to it. Staffa remained unknown to the wider world for so long precisely because reaching it was, and remains, an undertaking fraught with uncertainty and risk. But for those who do reach it, who time their journey right, who accept the rolling of the boat and the spray of cold Atlantic water, who maintain their balance and their nerve, the reward is immediate and overwhelming. As you approach from the south or west, the island reveals itself slowly. First, just a shape on the horizon, indistinct in the haze, then cliffs becoming visible, the dark basalt contrasting with white foam where waves strike. Then, if you are approaching from the right angle, the columns themselves start to become apparent, vertical lines too regular to be random, too perfect to seem natural. And finally, as you round the southern point of the island, Fingal's cave itself comes into view, a great arched opening in the cliff face, the columns forming a portico of stone, the dark interior hinting at depths and mysteries, the whole structure so architectural, so clearly formed that the first reaction is often disbelief. This cannot be natural. This must have been built. But it was not built, not by human hands. It was formed by processes that care nothing for human aesthetics, that follow only the blind imperatives of physics and chemistry, and yet which somehow, miraculously, produced something that speaks directly to human sensibility, that seems almost designed for human appreciation. Staffa itself is only one member of a larger family of volcanic remnants scattered across this part of Scotland. The entire region was shaped by volcanism, by the splitting apart of continents, by the opening of the Atlantic Ocean. What we see now, these islands, these cliffs, these remarkable formations, are the eroded cores of ancient volcanoes, the resistant remnants of lava flows that have outlasted the softer materials that once surrounded them. Mull, the much larger island to the east, is built of the same volcanic rocks. So are parts of Ardnamurchan, of Skye, of Rum. The Hebrides are a volcanic landscape, though the volcanoes themselves are long extinct, their fires cold for 60 million years, their shapes worn down and scattered by the relentless work of wind and water and ice. Understanding this context, understanding that Staffa is not unique, but rather is the most spectacular example of a regional geological phenomenon, helps situate the cave within the broader story of Earth's formation and evolution. The basalt columns we see at Fingal's cave are remarkable for their scale and preservation, for the perfection of their form and the accessibility of the space they create, but they are not alone. Similar formations exist elsewhere, most notably at the Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland, which we will return to later, but also in Iceland, at Devil's Postpile in California, at Svartifoss Waterfall in Iceland, and at numerous other locations around the world wherever basaltic lava has cooled under the right conditions. What makes Fingal's cave special is not geological uniqueness, but rather the particular combination of factors that make it not just geologically interesting, but aesthetically and acoustically exceptional. The scale of the columns, the dimensions of the cave, the action of the waves, the accessibility, and, not least, the attention it has received by artists and musicians and writers who have transformed it from mere geology into something approaching sacred.
But we are getting ahead of ourselves, rushing toward the cave before properly understanding the island, leaping to the artistic significance before grasping the physical reality. Let us slow down. Let us approach Staffa as Mendelssohn approached it, by boat, from the sea, with the island gradually revealing itself, with anticipation building, with the crossing itself becoming part of the experience. Let us feel the motion of the boat, the cold spray, the smell of salt and seaweed. Let us hear the cry of gulls and the deeper sound of the waves against rock. Let us see the cliffs growing taller as we approach, the water changing color from the blue-gray of deep ocean to the greener shades near shore, made turbulent by the shoaling bottom, made dangerous by submerged rocks and unpredictable currents.
The boat cannot simply pull up to the island. There is no harbor, no protected anchorage, no easy landing. The boat must time its approach with the waves, must navigate to the eastern side of the island where the cliffs are lowest, where a natural causeway of broken columns and tumbled rocks provides a kind of landing place, though landing is perhaps too gentle a word for the scramble from pitching boat to slippery stone. Visitors must time their movements with the surge of the waves, must accept the possibility of wet feet or worse, must commit to the jump or the step with the understanding that hesitation can be more dangerous than bold action. This is not a place for the casual tourist, not a site made safe and convenient by handrails and paved paths. It remains fundamentally wild, fundamentally difficult, fundamentally a place that demands something from those who visit, not just money or time, but courage, physical capability, and a willingness to accept that access is conditional, dependent on forces entirely beyond human control. Once on the island, wet, likely somewhat shaken, definitely exhilarated, the path leads south along the causeway toward the cave. The causeway itself is extraordinary, a natural walkway formed of the same basalt columns that line the cave, but here broken and tilted by the same forces that created them, by centuries of freezing and thawing, by storms and subsidence, by the slow work of gravity and time. Walking on it is like walking on a giant's cobblestone path. Each stone a cross-section of a hexagonal column, each one fitted imperfectly to its neighbors, creating gaps and irregularities that require careful footwork. To your left, the open ocean, waves breaking against the lower rocks, occasionally sending spray high enough to remind you of their presence. To your right, the cliff rising, columns extending upward, birds nesting in the crevices, their white guano streaking the dark stone. Ahead, the entrance to Fingal's cave growing larger with each step, the darkness within becoming more apparent, the sound of waves within the cave becoming audible, a deeper note beneath the surface noise of wind and surf. And then you are there, at the entrance, looking in. The first impression is of scale. The cave is larger than photographs suggest, larger than descriptions convey. The entrance is perhaps 60 feet high and perhaps 40 feet wide, though exact dimensions vary with tide and with where you measure from. The cave extends back into the island for roughly 230 feet, though again, definitions matter. At what point does cave become crack in the rock? At what point does the chamber narrow enough to no longer qualify? But at its best, in its main chamber, Fingal's cave is a substantial space, large enough to hold hundreds of people, large enough to have a noticeable acoustic signature, large enough to create that sense of enclosure while still being open to the sea. The columns continue inside, lining the walls, forming them entirely. They rise from the water which enters the cave with each wave, advancing and retreating, never still, and extend up to the roof, which is itself formed of the undersides of columns that have broken and fallen, creating a rougher, less regular surface than the walls, but still clearly part of the same geological phenomenon. The floor of the cave, if it can be called that, is the sea itself. There is no dry land within, no beach or shelf. At the entrance, the causeway extends perhaps 20 feet into the cave, allowing visitors to enter slightly, to get past the threshold and experience the interior. But beyond that point, the water is too deep, the surge too strong, the danger too great. To explore further requires a boat that can be rowed or motored in during calm conditions, requires a willingness to be inside a sea cave with waves, requires an understanding that retreat might be necessary suddenly and that conditions can change faster than boats can exit. The light inside is dim, filtered through the opening, reflecting off water that is never clear, never still. The colors are muted, the black and gray of the basalt, the dark green or brown of the water, depending on what it carries in suspension, the occasional flash of white foam where a wave strikes stone. There is no bright sunlight here, no vivid colors, only variations of darkness and gray,
only subtle gradations of light and shadow that shift constantly as the water moves, as clouds pass overhead, as the angle of the sun changes. It is a somber space, a contemplative space, a space that encourages quietness, that draws attention away from the visual toward the auditory, that makes you listen in a way that the outside world rarely demands.
And what you hear is difficult to describe precisely, which is perhaps why Mendelssohn reached for musical notation rather than words to capture it. You hear waves, certainly, but not the simple crash of surf on beach. You hear resonance, echo, the way sound multiplies in the confined space, the way each wave creates not just its own sound, but calls forth responses from previous waves still reverberating, creating a layering of tones, a complexity of sound that approaches harmony. You hear rhythm. The waves come in sets, patterns that repeat but never exactly, variations on a theme that the ocean composes spontaneously. You hear pitch. The cave itself seems to have a fundamental frequency, a note it prefers to sing, determined by its dimensions and the speed of sound in water and air and stone. You hear texture, the main tone of the waves breaking against the back of the cave, the higher splash and trickle of water falling from the roof, the lower rumble of water surging through underwater passages and gaps between columns. Put all of this together, and you have something that is not quite music, but is not quite not music either. Something that has structure but not composition, that has pattern but not intention, that has the raw materials of music, rhythm, pitch, tone, harmony, dynamics, but assembled by accident, by the blind action of physics on stone and water. It is, in the truest sense, a natural symphony, and standing in its midst, you can understand why someone with ears trained to hear music, with a mind organized around musical structure, might suddenly perceive a composition waiting to be born, might hear not just what is, but what could be, not just the raw, natural sounds, but their transformation into something more deliberately crafted, more consciously arranged, more human. But again, we are rushing ahead, moving too quickly toward Mendelssohn before properly understanding what came before him. Fingal's cave did not spring into existence in 1829. It had been there for millions of years before any human set foot on Staffa, had been there for thousands of years after humans arrived in Scotland, had been known to local inhabitants for centuries before any educated European discovered it. The cave has its own history, long and complex, and to properly understand its significance, we must trace that history, must understand what the cave was before it became famous, before it became a pilgrimage site, before it became, in some sense, as much an idea as a place, as much a symbol as a physical reality. The name itself, Fingal's Cave, points toward this longer, deeper history, connects the physical space to mythology, to stories told around fires in Scottish halls for generations before any of those stories were written down. Fingal is an anglicized version of Fionn mac Cumhaill, a mythological Celtic hero, a warrior and leader of the Fianna, a band of warriors in Irish and Scottish legend. He appears in countless tales, a figure of superhuman strength and wisdom, a defender against threats both mortal and supernatural, a bridge between the human and divine worlds. The stories of Fionn and the Fianna form part of the Fenian cycle of Irish mythology, tales that were transmitted orally for centuries before being codified in medieval manuscripts, tales that continued to be told and retold in the Scottish Highlands and Islands long after the medieval period ended. One of the most famous Fionn legends connects him to the geological formation we're discussing. The story tells of a rivalry between Fionn, the Scottish-Irish giant, and Benanander, a giant who lived in Scotland across the water. Depending on which version you follow, and there are many versions, as with all oral traditions, the giants either couldn't stand each other or wanted to meet and fight, or perhaps Fionn wanted to bring Benanander to Ireland to teach him a lesson, or perhaps it was the other way around. The exact motivation varies, but the result is the same.
Fionn built a causeway across the water, a bridge made of massive basalt columns, allowing giants to cross between Ireland and Scotland without getting their feet wet. The physical evidence for this story exists at both ends. At the Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland, there are thousands of basalt columns, hexagonal in cross-section, fitted together like a cobbled path, extending from the land down into the sea and continuing underwater. And at Staffa, there are similar columns, the same formation, the same geometry, as if the causeway that begins at the Giant's Causeway continues 60 miles of ocean to emerge again at Fingal's Cave. From a mythological perspective, this makes perfect sense. It is clearly the same structure, the same causeway, and the only explanation is that it was built by someone large enough and strong enough to work on such a scale. But from a geological perspective, it also makes sense, though the explanation is different. Both formations are the result of similar volcanic processes occurring around the same time in the same geological context, part of the same volcanic province that stretched across this entire region. But geology is a relatively recent invention. For the people who lived here for millennia before geology existed, the giant story was not a metaphor or a charming tale. It was simply the explanation, as valid and reasonable as any other.
Fingal's Cave, in this mythological context, becomes part of Fionn's infrastructure, part of the causeway system, perhaps even Fionn's home or fortress or meeting hall. The scale of the cave, the perfection of the columns, the grandeur of the space, all of this fits with a structure built by and for giants. A normal human building this would be inexplicable, would be beyond the technology of any historical period, but a giant building it makes perfect sense. The mythology adapts to the physical evidence, or perhaps the physical evidence gives rise to the mythology. It is impossible to know which came first, whether people saw the columns and invented Fionn to explain them, or whether stories of Fionn led people to see the columns as evidence of his existence. Most likely, it was reciprocal, with the stories and the stones reinforcing each other, each making the other more believable, more meaningful, more worthy of attention and respect. For the Gaelic-speaking inhabitants of the Hebrides, the cave would have been known by local names long before Fingal's Cave became its standard designation in English. It was an Uaimh Bhinn in Gaelic, the Melodic Cave or the Musical Cave, a name that recognizes its acoustic properties, that describes the actual experience of being there, that captures something essential about the place in a way that the later English name, focused on mythology and named heroes, perhaps does not. And Uaimh Bhinn speaks to what the cave does, to its function, to the way it transforms sound. It is a name given by people who knew the cave intimately, who had visited it repeatedly, who understood its moods and its variations, who listened to it carefully enough to recognize that melody was its essential characteristic. This suggests a long history of local knowledge, of the cave being known and visited and valued by people who lived nearby, who crossed to Staffa when conditions allowed, who perhaps used the cave for shelter or for meetings, or for purposes we can only guess at. The modern visitor, arriving by tour boat, staying for 30 minutes or an hour before departing, experiences the cave in a necessarily superficial way. The local visitor, arriving by small boat or even swimming in calm conditions, able to time the visit precisely, knowing the tides and the weather patterns intimately, understanding the sea and the island in ways only long familiarity provides, this visitor would have had a completely different relationship with the cave, would have known it in its many moods, would have experienced it across seasons and years, would have understood it not as a tourist destination, but as a place, known and familiar, even if always somewhat mysterious, always retaining the capacity to surprise. But for all this local knowledge, for all the centuries during which the cave was known to those who lived nearby, it remained invisible to the wider world, unrecorded in any text, unmarked on any map, absent from the consciousness of educated Europe until the late 18th century.
The reasons for this obscurity are not mysterious. Staffa is remote, the Hebrides were seen as a wild and dangerous periphery of the civilized world, Gaelic culture was marginalized and often suppressed, and the geological sciences that would make basalt formations interesting to educated observers had not yet developed. There was simply no reason for anyone outside the immediate area to know about or care about a sea cave on a tiny uninhabited island off the coast of Scotland. The world was full of remarkable things, and this was just one more, known to a few, invisible to the many, waiting for the right combination of circumstances to bring it to broader attention. That combination arrived in August of 1772 in the form of Sir Joseph Banks and his scientific expedition. Banks was already famous. He had sailed with Captain Cook on the first voyage around the world, had become one of Britain's most prominent naturalists, had been elected president of the Royal Society. In 1772, he organized a private expedition to Iceland and the Hebrides, combining scientific observation with aristocratic adventure, employing the best artists and naturalists he could recruit, determined to document the natural wonders of these northern lands. The expedition was in many ways characteristic of its era. Wealthy Europeans venturing into regions they considered remote and exotic, armed with the tools of Enlightenment science, seeking to catalog and understand, and in a sense, to possess through knowledge what they encountered. On the 7th of August, note the date, exactly 57 years before Mendelssohn's visit, Banks's expedition reached Staffa. They had heard rumors of unusual rock formations, perhaps from local guides, perhaps from sailors familiar with these waters. They approached the island and, seeing the basalt columns, immediately recognized that they had found something extraordinary. Banks himself went ashore, walked the causeway, entered the cave, and was stunned. His journal entry, later published, describes the cave in terms of wonder and amazement, compares it to human architecture, notes the perfection of the columns, the grandeur of the space, the sound of the waves. He writes as someone encountering something entirely unexpected, something for which his previous experience had not prepared him. But Banks did more than just observe and record. He brought the cave back with him. Not physically, but through descriptions, through sketches made by the artists accompanying the expedition, through geological samples, through the authority of his own reputation. He presented his findings to the Royal Society, published accounts in scientific journals, showed the sketches to friends and colleagues. The cave entered European consciousness not through gradual awareness, but through sudden revelation, through the power of authoritative testimony backed by visual evidence. Banks, in a sense, discovered Fingal's cave in exactly the way that European explorers discovered lands and phenomena that had been known to indigenous peoples for millennia, by making them known to the audience that mattered to him, by translating local knowledge into the categories and contexts that his culture recognized as authoritative.
The effect was immediate and dramatic. Within a few years, Fingal's cave had become famous among educated Europeans, had become a site that natural philosophers and artists felt they must visit if they had any opportunity. The cave appeared in books, in engravings, in scientific treatises, in travel accounts. It became, in the language of the time, one of the wonders of Britain, a natural curiosity worthy of pilgrimage, a place where nature had created something that rivaled or exceeded human achievement. The Romantic movement was just beginning to gather force, and Fingal's cave arrived at precisely the right moment to capture the Romantic imagination. It was remote, it was sublime, it combined natural grandeur with acoustic phenomena, it had mythological associations, it was difficult to reach, and therefore all the more worthy of the effort required. The artists came first, or rather, the artists came along with the writers and the scientists and the wealthy tourists who could afford to charter boats and endure uncomfortable journeys to remote islands. They came seeking the sublime, that peculiarly romantic category of aesthetic experience that involves awe mixed with terror, beauty combined with danger, the overwhelming sense of encountering something vast and powerful that dwarfs human scale and pretensions.
The cave provided all of this. The waves inside could be dangerous. The approach was often frightening. The scale was impressive. The darkness suggested depths and mysteries. The sound was otherworldly. It checked every box in the romantic catalog of sublime natural phenomena. J.M.W. Turner, perhaps the greatest British painter of the age, visited Staffa in 1831, 2 years after Mendelssohn. He sketched extensively, produced watercolors, and eventually created a major oil painting titled Staffa, Fingal's Cave, which he exhibited at the Royal Academy in 1832. The painting is characteristic of Turner's mature style, luminous, atmospheric, more interested in capturing the effects of light and weather than in precise topographical accuracy. The cave mouth glows with an eerie light, the waves are turbulent, the steamship that brought visitors, a modern intrusion into a timeless scene, belches smoke. The whole composition suggests power, mystery, and the insignificance of humanity before nature. Turner's painting did for the visual arts what Mendelssohn's Overture did for music. It translated the experience of the cave into another medium, made it accessible to those who would never visit, and in doing so, further cemented the cave's reputation as something extraordinary, something worthy of the attention of the greatest artists of the age. William Wordsworth visited in 1833, late in his career, and wrote about the experience. His account is more ambivalent than some. He was seasick during the crossing, which colored his perception, and he found the cave impressive but not as overwhelming as he had been led to expect, perhaps because expectations had been raised so high by the accounts of others. Still, he recognized its power, its uniqueness, and he added his own testimony to the growing body of literature about Staffa. John Keats had visited earlier, in 1818, actually before Mendelssohn, and wrote letters describing the cave in terms of amazement, though he produced no major poem directly inspired by it. Other writers followed. Sir Walter Scott visited multiple times, and his writings about the Hebrides, while not focused exclusively on Staffa, helped popularize the region and make it seem like a place of romance and adventure worthy of attention. All of this was building toward a crescendo of attention and reputation. All of it was making Fingal's Cave increasingly famous, increasingly central to the romantic imagination's geography of sublime natural sights. But it was Mendelssohn's visit, and more importantly, the music that resulted from it, that would transform the cave from a site of scientific curiosity and romantic tourism into something more enduring, something that would outlast the fashions of the Romantic era and remain part of cultural consciousness into our own time and presumably far beyond. But to understand what Mendelssohn did, to appreciate the genius of his transformation of place into music, we must first understand more about the cave itself, about its acoustic properties, about why it sounds the way it does, about the physics and geology that create its unique sonic environment. We must slow down again, resist the urge to rush to the famous moment, and instead dwell in the cave, listen carefully, try to understand what Mendelssohn heard and why it struck him so profoundly. The acoustic properties of Fingal's Cave are not accidental. They are the result of specific physical characteristics that create a particular sonic environment. The cave is a chamber with a single opening to the outside, which means that sound can enter but has limited means of escape. Sound waves entering the cave will reflect off the walls, the ceiling, the water surface, creating echoes and reverberations. The basalt is hard and relatively smooth, which means it reflects sound efficiently rather than absorbing it. The dimensions of the cave, its length, width, and height, create standing waves at particular frequencies, meaning that some pitches will resonate more strongly than others, will be amplified while other frequencies are dampened. The water at the base of the cave adds another layer of complexity.
Water is an excellent conductor of sound, and the surface of the water acts as both a reflector and an absorber, depending on the wavelength. Low frequencies, long wavelengths, tend to be reflected by water surfaces. Higher frequencies can be absorbed. This means that the cave naturally emphasizes lower tones, creates a sonic environment that is dominated by bass notes, by deep resonances, by sounds that you feel as much as hear.
The waves themselves are the primary sound source, and they are remarkably consistent in their behavior. Ocean waves have characteristic frequencies, determined by the winds that create them and the distances they have traveled. Atlantic swells hitting the western coast of Scotland typically have periods of 8 to 15 seconds, meaning that a wave arrives every 8 to 15 seconds, creating a rhythmic pulse that is slow enough to be perceived as rhythm rather than as continuous tone. When these waves enter Fingal's cave, they create sound through multiple mechanisms. The impact of water against the back wall of the cave, the compression of air in the chamber, the rushing of water through and around the basalt columns, the drainage of water back out as each wave recedes. All of these sounds are then processed by the acoustic environment of the cave, reflected, echoed, reverberated, amplified at some frequencies and diminished at others. The result is a complex soundscape that has structure without having design, that has musical characteristics without having musical intention. It is the sound of physics and geology in action, but it is processed by human perception, by brains that have evolved to find patterns in sound, to hear rhythm and melody even where none exists intentionally, to transform raw sensory input into something meaningful, something that connects to emotion and memory and culture. For someone like Mendelssohn, with ears trained through years of intensive musical education, with a mind organized around musical structure and theory, with an aesthetic sensibility primed to find beauty in sound, the cave would have been an overwhelming experience. He would have heard not just noise but structure, not just random sounds but relationships between sounds, not just chaos but the raw materials of composition waiting to be refined and arranged. He would have heard rhythms that could be regularized, melodies that could be developed, harmonies that could be elaborated. He would have heard, in short, the beginning of a piece of music, and he would have had the technical skill and the artistic vision to capture what he heard, to translate it from the accidental music of nature into the intentional music of art. But we are getting ahead of ourselves yet again. Before we can properly understand Mendelssohn's moment of inspiration, we need to understand Mendelssohn himself, who he was in 1829, what he was seeking, what prepared him to respond to Fingal's cave in the way that he did. We need to trace his journey to Scotland, understand his travels and his state of mind, see him as a young man at a crucial point in his development as a composer, open to influence, seeking experiences that would shape his artistic voice. Only then can we fully appreciate what happened when he stood at the entrance to the cave and heard, in the sound of waves against basalt, the opening notes of a masterpiece. Felix Mendelssohn Bartholdy was born in Hamburg in 1809 into a wealthy, cultured, and deeply musical family. His grandfather was Moses Mendelssohn, the famous philosopher. His father was a successful banker. His mother was accomplished and educated. He and his sister Fanny both showed extraordinary musical talent from early childhood and received the best musical education money could buy, studying with the finest teachers, exposed to the best musicians, playing and composing from the earliest ages. By his teens, Mendelssohn had already composed chamber music, symphonies, and other works that showed remarkable maturity and skill. He was a prodigy, but not a prodigy who burned out. He was disciplined, hardworking, intellectually serious, as comfortable discussing literature and philosophy as music, fluent in multiple languages, at ease in the highest cultural circles of European society. In 1829, at age 20, he was at a crucial transitional moment.
He had just achieved his first major public success, conducting a performance of Bach's St. Matthew's Passion in Berlin, a work that had not been performed since Bach's death nearly 80 years earlier. This performance is often credited with beginning the Bach revival, with rescuing Bach's music from obscurity and establishing him as a central figure in the classical canon. It demonstrated Mendelssohn's historical consciousness, his understanding that music had a history and a tradition that needed to be preserved and transmitted. But it also raised a question: what would Mendelssohn himself contribute? He had shown he could interpret the past brilliantly, but what would his own voice be? What kind of original music would he create? To help answer these questions, to give himself space to develop and explore, to expose himself to new influences and experiences, Mendelssohn embarked on a grand tour, that traditional rite of passage for educated young Europeans, traveling through Britain and then planning to continue to Italy and other destinations. He was accompanied by his friend Karl Klingemann, a civil servant and amateur poet who shared Mendelssohn's cultural interests and could provide companionship and conversation during the journey. They traveled with letters of introduction to important musical and cultural figures, with sufficient funds to travel comfortably, with the freedom to go where they wished and stay as long as they liked. It was, in short, an ideal situation for a young artist. The opportunity to experience new places and cultures without financial stress, to meet interesting people, to have adventures, to gather experiences and impressions that could be transformed into art.
They spent time in England first, where Mendelssohn was already becoming well known, where his music was performed and well received, where he met with musicians and aristocrats and was treated as a rising star. But England, while pleasant, was not particularly exotic or challenging. It was Germany with better weather and worse food, as some travelers put it. Scotland, on the other hand, promised something different. It was remote enough to be interesting, had dramatic landscapes, carried associations with romantic history and legend, and was far enough from the centers of European civilization to feel like genuine travel rather than just moving from one city to another. Mendelssohn and Klingemann traveled north, visiting Edinburgh, exploring the Highlands, seeing the famous sights that every educated tourist was expected to see. They visited Holyrood Palace, where Mary, Queen of Scots, had lived. They saw Loch Lomond, Loch Katrine, and other scenic sights that Walter Scott's novels had made famous. They traveled by coach and on foot, enduring bad weather, staying in uncomfortable inns, experiencing the reality of travel in remote regions in the early 19th century, which is to say, experiencing discomfort, uncertainty, delays, and the kind of minor hardships that build character and make good stories afterward. By early August, they had reached the west coast and were planning to visit the Hebrides. This was still relatively unusual. The Hebrides were not standard tourist itinerary, were difficult to reach, required time and determination. But Mendelssohn had heard about Fingal's cave, had read Banks' account and other descriptions, and was determined to see it for himself. The weather was uncertain, as it almost always is in the Hebrides, but they found a boat willing to make the crossing, committed themselves to the journey, and set out across the water towards Staffa. The date was the 7th of August, 1829. Mendelssohn was 20 years old. He had no idea that what he was about to experience would become one of the defining moments of his artistic life, would result in a composition that would be performed thousands of times, would introduce millions of people to a place he was seeing for the first time. He was simply a young traveler, curious and open to experience, heading toward a natural phenomenon he had heard was remarkable. He expected to be impressed. He probably expected to be inspired. He was a romantic, after all, traveling specifically to experience sublime natural phenomena. But he could not have expected the immediacy and completeness of what actually happened, the way the cave would speak to him not gradually, but instantly, not vaguely, but precisely, in the language he understood best, the language of music. The crossing to Staffa from Mull or from Iona, the accounts are not entirely clear about the exact departure point, would have taken an hour or more depending on wind and tide. The boat would have been small, open, uncomfortable. Mendelssohn and Klingemann would have been cold, wet from spray, likely somewhat nervous about the crossing. Neither was an experienced sailor. The Hebridean waters can be frightening to those unused to them, with waves that seem too large for the distances they have traveled, with currents that make boats move in unexpected directions, with the constant sense that the ocean is vast and powerful and you are small and vulnerable. But eventually they reached Staffa. They saw the columns, saw the cave entrance, made the awkward transition from boat to slippery causeway. They walked carefully toward the cave mouth, Mendelssohn in front, Klingemann following. They reached the entrance. They stopped, looked in, listened. And something happened in Mendelssohn's mind. Some connection was made. Some translation occurred instantly from sensory experience to musical conception. He heard the waves, heard the echoes, heard the deep tones and the complex rhythms, and he heard music. Not just sound, but actual music, structured and formed, the opening of a composition. He did something remarkable then, something that speaks to both his musical gift and his discipline. He took out his traveling notebook, the same notebook in which he had been sketching musical ideas and recording impressions throughout his journey, and he wrote down the opening bars of what would become the Hebrides Overture. Right there, at the cave mouth, cold and wet and overwhelmed, he captured the essential musical idea, the theme that would form the foundation of the entire piece. 16 bars, complete, clear, unmistakably representing the motion of waves, the rhythm of the sea, the resonance of the cave. It was composition at its most inspired, most immediate, most complete. Later that day, back on shore, Mendelssohn wrote a letter to his family describing the experience. He included the musical notation, the opening bars, and he wrote, "In order to make you understand how extraordinarily the Hebrides affected me, the following came into my mind there," and then the music. A letter makes clear that this was not something he developed later, not something he worked out gradually. It came to him in the cave, immediately, fully formed in its essential outline, if not in every detail. The cave spoke to him, and he translated what it said. But translation is not simple transcription. What Mendelssohn captured was not the literal sound of the cave, but rather his experience of the cave, filtered through his musical training, shaped by his aesthetic sensibility, formed according to the conventions and structures of Western classical music. He heard waves, but he didn't try to imitate the sound of waves directly. Instead, he created a musical pattern that evoked the feeling of waves, the rhythm of waves, the rise and fall and constant motion of waves. He heard echoes and resonances, but he translated them into harmonies and counterpoint, into musical structures that have their own logic and rules. He heard the cave's deep tones, and he orchestrated for them, choosing instruments and registers that would create similar acoustic effects in a concert hall that the cave created naturally.
This is the genius of the piece. It is not program music in a simple imitative sense. It does not try to reproduce the sounds of nature directly. Instead, it captures the essence of the experience, translates geological and oceanic phenomena into musical terms, creates something that is unquestionably a piece of music, following musical logic and musical form, but which nevertheless communicates something specific and concrete about a particular place. When you listen to the Hebrides Overture, you are not hearing Fingal's Cave. You are hearing Mendelssohn's response to Fingal's Cave, his interpretation, his transformation of place into sound, of geology into melody, of personal experience into something that can be shared with anyone who listens. The composition process took years. The initial inspiration came in August 1829, but Mendelssohn continued to revise and refine the piece. He completed a first version in December 1830, more than a year after his visit, but he wasn't satisfied. He continued to work on it, revising orchestration, adjusting harmonies, perfecting the structure. He tried out versions with different orchestras, listened to how they sounded, made further changes. The final version, the one that is performed today, was not completed until 1832, 3 years after his visit to the cave.
This extended gestation period is important. It shows that despite the apparent immediacy of the initial inspiration, Mendelssohn understood that inspiration alone was not enough, that craft and careful work were necessary to transform an initial idea into a finished composition worthy of performance and preservation. The composition is structured as an overture, a form that Mendelssohn was particularly skilled at writing. An overture is essentially a one-movement orchestral piece, often serving as an introduction to an opera or play, but increasingly in the 19th century, standing alone as a concert work. Mendelssohn wrote several concert overtures, independent orchestral pieces that were complete in themselves, and the Hebrides is perhaps the most famous of them. It follows sonata form loosely, an exposition presenting the main themes, a development section where those themes are explored and transformed, and a recapitulation where the themes return, followed by a coda. But Mendelssohn uses this formal structure flexibly, adapting it to serve his expressive purposes rather than following it mechanically. The opening of the piece opens with the theme Mendelssohn sketched at the cave, a rising and falling pattern in the violas, cellos, and bassoons, marked allegro moderato, moving in a gentle but persistent rhythm that immediately suggests the motion of waves. It is not fast, not aggressive, but it is constant, unceasing, like the ocean itself. The theme is passed to other instruments, is developed, is combined with counter-melodies. A second theme emerges, more lyrical, more traditionally melodic, representing perhaps the visual beauty of the scene, the columns and the light, the grandeur of the space. The two themes interact, are developed separately and together, are transformed through modulation to different keys, through changes in orchestration, through variations in dynamics. The middle section of the piece becomes more intense, more dramatic. The waves grow larger, the music more forceful. There are moments of real power, suggestions of storms, of danger, of the sublime terror that the Romantics sought in nature. But Mendelssohn never loses control, never lets the piece become chaotic. Even at its most intense, the music remains structured, coherent, purposeful. This is nature experienced through art, nature rendered intelligible and beautiful through musical form. The orchestration is masterful. Mendelssohn uses the full resources of the Romantic orchestra, strings, woodwinds, brass, timpani, but he uses them with restraint and precision. He knows when to let a single instrument carry a melody and when to use the full ensemble. He understands timbre, the unique sound quality of each instrument, and he uses this understanding to create a rich, varied sonic palette. The piece sounds different from other orchestral music of the period. It has a distinctive character, a sound world that is specifically its own, that is inseparable from what it represents. What is particularly remarkable is how well the music captures aspects of the cave that are difficult to put into words. The sense of enclosure, of being inside a space that is both natural and almost architectural. The constant motion of the water, never still, never quite the same from moment to moment. The deep resonances, the way sound seems to come from all directions at once. The play of light and shadow, of visibility and mystery. All of this is somehow present in the music, not through literal imitation, but through musical analogy, through creation of acoustic relationships that parallel the relationships in the cave. The composition was premiered in London in 1832 under the title The Isles of Fingal, though it soon became known as the Hebrides or Fingal's Cave. It was immediately successful. Audiences and critics recognized that Mendelssohn had created something special, something that combined descriptive power with musical integrity, something that told a story without needing words, that painted a picture without needing images. The piece entered the standard orchestral repertoire and has remained there ever since, one of the most frequently performed orchestral works of the 19th century, beloved by audiences, respected by musicians, studied by composers as an example of how to create programmatic music that is also absolutely convincing as pure music. The success of the overture had consequences beyond music. It made Fingal's cave famous in a new way, to a much broader audience than travel accounts or paintings could reach. People who would never visit Scotland, who would never see the Hebrides, could now experience something of the cave through Mendelssohn's music. Concert programs would include descriptions of the cave, would explain what the music was representing. Audiences would listen with an image of the cave in their minds, would try to hear the waves and the echoes in the orchestral textures. The piece became inseparable from the place, became the way that millions of people encountered Staffa for the first time. This relationship between place and music goes both ways. The music made the cave more famous, but the cave also validated the music, gave it a concrete referent, provided a physical reality that grounded the musical abstraction. When people visited the cave, they would inevitably think of Mendelssohn, would try to hear what he heard, would listen to the waves and wonder how he translated them into the opening theme. The cave became a kind of pilgrimage site, not just for geologists and romantics, but for music lovers, for people who knew the overture and wanted to experience its source. This continues to the present. Tour guides on boats to Staffa will play recordings of the Hebrides Overture, will point out how the music captures the cave, will create a multimedia experience where the physical and the musical reinforce each other. This raises interesting questions about the nature of artistic inspiration and the relationship between art and its sources. Did Mendelssohn capture something essential about the cave, something that was there waiting to be found? Or did he project onto the cave something from his own musical imagination, something that wasn't there until he put it there? Is the Hebrides Overture a representation of Fingal's cave or a creation inspired by Fingal's cave? These questions probably don't have simple answers. The most honest response might be both. That Mendelssohn heard something real in the cave, something about its acoustic properties and its physical presence, but that he also brought to the cave his own sensibility, his own musical training, his own creative imagination, and that what he created was a fusion of what was there and what he added, inseparable and unique. What is certain is that the piece works on its own terms. You do not need to know anything about Fingal's cave to appreciate the Hebrides Overture. It is a successful piece of absolute music, meaningful and emotionally effective even without any programmatic context. But knowing about the cave adds a dimension to the listening experience, provides additional ways to engage with the music, creates connections between the abstract patterns of sound and concrete physical realities. It is richer for having both aspects, the pure musical structure and the extra musical reference. This dual nature is characteristic of the best programmatic music, music that tells a story or describes a scene, but which also stands alone as a satisfying musical experience. In the years following the premiere, Mendelssohn's reputation grew steadily. He became one of the most important musicians in Europe, a successful composer, conductor, administrator, and teacher. He wrote symphonies, concertos, chamber music, oratories, and songs. He founded the Leipzig Conservatory, trained a generation of musicians, conducted premieres of important works, including Schubert's great C major symphony. He was enormously productive and influential, and he died young at age 38 in 1847, worn out by overwork and stress. But throughout his career, the Hebrides remained one of his most popular works, a piece he conducted frequently, a piece audiences always wanted to hear. Mendelssohn's own relationship to the piece seems to have been positive. He didn't experience the ambivalence that some composers feel toward their most popular works, didn't come to resent its success or feel that it overshadowed more ambitious compositions. He recognized it as something special, something where inspiration and craft had combined perfectly, where a travel experience had been successfully transformed into lasting art.
In letters and conversations, he spoke of the Scottish journey with pleasure, remembered Staffa and the cave as highlights of his travels, maintained affection for the piece throughout his life. The Victorian era saw Fingal's cave become even more famous, partly because of Mendelssohn's music, but also because of broader cultural trends. The Romantic fascination with sublime natural phenomena continued and intensified. Railways made travel easier, steamships made the crossing to the Hebrides more reliable, and tourism became increasingly accessible to the growing middle class. Staffa became one of the standard destinations for anyone doing a tour of Scotland, mentioned in guidebooks, included in travel itineraries, painted and photographed and described in countless travel accounts. The Victorian visitors came in their thousands, year after year, dressed in their best travel clothes, arriving on steamships that could manage the crossing more safely than the small sailing vessels of earlier decades. They would land on the Causeway, walk carefully toward the cave, enter as far as conditions allowed, take in the sight, listen to the sound, and try to experience what Mendelssohn had experienced, what Banks had experienced, what all the famous visitors had experienced. They would collect pieces of basalt as souvenirs, despite regulations against doing so. They would carve their initials on the columns, a practice that was common in the 19th century, but which we now recognize as vandalism. They would take photographs once photography became practical, creating a visual record of their visit, proof that they had made the pilgrimage, that they had seen one of the wonders of Britain.
Some of these visitors were disappointed. The cave, like any famous destination, could not possibly live up to every expectation, could not be equally impressive to every observer, could not provide sublime experiences on demand. Weather conditions varied, making some visits spectacular and others merely adequate. Seasickness affected many visitors, coloring their perception of the entire experience. The difficulty of access meant that some people arrived exhausted and uncomfortable, not in the right frame of mind to appreciate natural beauty. And expectations, raised by Mendelssohn's music and by countless glowing descriptions, were sometimes impossibly high, setting up inevitable disappointment when reality failed to match imagination. But for many, perhaps most, the cave delivered on its promises. It was as impressive as advertised, as beautiful as described, as acoustically remarkable as claimed. Standing at the entrance, looking down the length of the cave with its perfectly formed columns, hearing the waves resonant within, feeling the spray and the cold air, sensing the depth of geological time represented by the stone, this experience remained powerful, regardless of how many people had experienced it before, regardless of how famous the cave had become. The sublime cannot be exhausted by repetition, cannot be used up by too many visitors. Each person's experience is their own, immediate and direct, not diminished by the fact that others have stood in the same place and felt similar awe. The scientific understanding of the cave continued to develop throughout the 19th and into the 20th century. Geologists studied the basalt, analyzed its composition, determined its age, traced its connection to the broader volcanic history of the region. They mapped the columns, measured their dimensions, studied the variations in their form. They developed theories about how columnar jointing occurs, tested those theories through observation and experiment, refined their understanding of the cooling processes that create such formations. The cave became a textbook example, a place where students of geology could see directly the results of volcanic processes, could observe at human scale phenomena that occur worldwide but are rarely so accessible or so perfectly preserved. The acoustic properties also received scientific attention. Researchers measured reverberation times, analyzed frequency responses, studied how the cave's dimensions affected sound propagation. They discovered that the cave has particular resonant frequencies, that it amplifies some tones while damping others, that its acoustic behavior is complex and varies with tide levels and wave conditions.
This work helped explain why the cave sounds the way it does, why Mendelssohn heard what he heard, why the musical qualities of the space are not just subjective impressions but have objective physical bases. Understanding the science doesn't diminish the aesthetic experience. If anything, it enhances it. Knowing that the columns formed through specific physical processes, that each one represents the cooling of a particular volume of lava, that the hexagonal pattern emerges from the mathematics of stress distribution in cooling rock, this knowledge adds depth to the visual experience, connects what you see to broader physical principles, situates this particular place within universal processes. Similarly, understanding the acoustics, knowing why the cave resonates as it does, recognizing the physical basis for its musical qualities, this doesn't make the sound less beautiful or less moving. It simply adds intellectual appreciation to aesthetic appreciation, allows engagement at multiple levels simultaneously. The 20th century brought new challenges and new awareness. 2 world wars disrupted tourism, made the Hebrides temporarily inaccessible to casual visitors, reminded people that even places of beauty exist within historical contexts shaped by human conflict and suffering. The interwar period saw renewed tourism, though never quite matching the Victorian peak. The post-war period brought mass tourism, with larger boats, more frequent service, better facilities, but also concerns about sustainability, about the impact of thousands of visitors on a fragile environment, about how to preserve the cave for future generations while allowing present generations to experience it. Conservation became an increasingly important concern. The basalt columns, while geologically durable, are not indestructible. Frost action continues to crack and break them. Storms remove material. The constant traffic of visitors contributes to wear on the causeway. The souveniring and graffiti of earlier generations left permanent marks. By the late 20th century, it was clear that some level of management and protection was necessary, that the cave could not simply be left to nature and to unregulated visitation without consequences. Staffa was acquired by the National Trust for Scotland in 1986, ensuring permanent protection and providing resources for conservation and management. Access policies were formalized, regulations against removing material or damaging the columns were enforced, monitoring programs were established to track changes in the geological features over time. The goal was to maintain a balance, to preserve the cave while still allowing people to experience it, to protect it from damage while not making it so regulated that the experience becomes sterile or artificial. This balance is never perfect and requires constant adjustment, but the commitment to finding it represents a recognition that places like Fingal's Cave are precious, irreplaceable, worthy of care.
Climate change has added a new dimension to conservation concerns. Rising sea levels may eventually affect the cave, changing how waves interact with it, potentially increasing erosion rates. Changes in ocean temperature and chemistry may affect the ecosystems around the island, may change the character of the place, even if the stone itself remains. These are long-term concerns, operating on timescales of decades and centuries, but they are real, and they require attention from those responsible for preserving significant natural sites. Experiencing Fingal's Cave today is both easier and more complicated than it was in Mendelssohn's time. Easier because transportation is more reliable, because boats designed for tourism make regular crossings in season, because information is readily available, because accommodation and facilities are better. More complicated because you must book in advance, because you must accept that the trip might be cancelled due to weather or sea conditions, because you must navigate regulations and tourist infrastructure, because you share the experience with dozens or hundreds of others rather than experiencing it in relative solitude. The boat journey from Mull or Iona takes perhaps an hour, weather dependent. Modern boats are more comfortable than 19th century vessels, more stable, safer, but they are still small enough to move significantly in the waves, still subject to the same wind and currents that affected earlier visitors.
The crossing remains an adventure, remains a journey across genuinely wild water to a genuinely remote destination. You see seabirds, puffins if you're lucky and the timing is right, gannets, fulmars, gulls. You may see seals hauled out on rocks, may see dolphins or even whales if fortune favors you. The Hebrides remain a place where wildlife is abundant, where the natural world is present and visible in ways it rarely is in more developed regions. As Staffa appears on the horizon, the anticipation builds. You know what you're going to see. You've seen photographs, maybe videos, certainly you've heard descriptions. But direct experience has a quality that no mediation can fully capture, and as the island grows larger, as the columns become visible, as the boat navigates around to the eastern landing point, excitement mixes with nervousness. The landing is still challenging, still requires coordination with the waves, still involves that moment of commitment when you step from boat to rock and accept the possibility of getting wet, of slipping, of the mild danger that makes the experience feel real. The walk along the causeway to the cave is short but requires attention. The stone is often slick with spray or rain, the surface is uneven, the gaps between columns sometimes wide enough to catch a foot. To your left, the ocean, sometimes calm, sometimes violent, always reminding you of its presence. To your right, the cliff rising, birds wheeling and crying, the sense of vertical scale, of being in a marginal space between sea and land, neither fully on one nor the other. And ahead, growing with each step, the cave mouth, the columns framing it, the darkness within, the sound of waves echoing out. And then you arrive, and you stop, and you look, and you listen, and you try to take it all in, try to perceive clearly what you're seeing and hearing, try to be present to the experience rather than immediately reaching for your camera or your phone. This is harder than it sounds in our documented age, when the impulse to record often precedes the impulse to experience, when we sometimes see things only through screens, when proof of having been somewhere sometimes seems more important than actually being there. But the effort is worth making. The discipline of simply being present, simply observing and listening without immediately trying to capture or share, allowing the place to affect you directly before filtering it through technology and social media. What you hear, if you listen carefully, is exactly what Mendelssohn heard, though you hear it knowing what he made of it, hearing the waves with the music in your mind, unable to separate the natural sounds from the artistic transformation. The rhythm of the waves, the resonance of the cave, the complex layering of tones, it's all there, unchanged by 190 years, fundamentally the same as it was when Banks first entered, as it will be for as long as waves strike this shore and these columns stand. The constancy is remarkable, the sense that this is not just a place, but a process, ongoing, essentially unchanged across human timescales, connecting you to everyone who has stood here before, creating a community across time of people who have been moved by this particular combination of stone and water and sound. If conditions allow, if the tide is right and the waves not too large, you can enter the cave slightly, can walk out onto the causeway that extends perhaps 20 feet into the cavern. You are inside now, looking out at the light, seeing the columns from within, hearing the sound change as you move deeper into the space. The water is just below, dark and restless, dangerous if you were to fall into it, but separated from you by a few feet of stone. The roof is overhead, rough and lower than the entrance, making the space feel more enclosed, more protective, but also potentially threatening, depending on your disposition and the conditions. This is as far as most visitors go. Beyond this point requires a boat and calm conditions and a willingness to be inside a sea cave with waves, which most people sensibly decline. But even from the entrance, even without penetrating deeply into the cave, the experience is powerful. The visual impact of the columns, the acoustic strangeness of the space, the physical sensation of being in this particular place at this particular moment, it accumulates, it builds, it creates something that is more than the sum of its parts.
You understand, perhaps for the first time, why this place inspired music, why composers and artists and writers felt compelled to respond to it, to try to capture it, to translate it into other forms. You understand that some places have a quality that demands response, that calls forth creativity, that transforms those who encounter them from passive observers into active interpreters, compelled to do something with the experience, to make something from it.
Of course, not everyone responds by composing an overture. Most visitors take photographs, trying to capture the visual aspect, struggling with the lighting conditions inside the cave, with the contrast between the bright entrance and the dark interior, with the impossibility of capturing in a still image the sense of motion and sound and scale. Some simply stand and look, committing the scene to memory, trusting their own powers of recall rather than technological aids. Some are visibly moved, quiet and contemplative, while others are chatty and excited, expressing their response through conversation and exclamation. There is no right way to experience Fingal's cave, no proper emotional response that you're supposed to have. Each person brings their own sensibility, their own history, their own capacity for awe, and the cave meets them where they are. After perhaps 30 minutes, the standard time that tour boats allow, though it feels both too long and too short. Too long because you've seen what there is to see visually, but too short because the place deserves longer contemplation. It's time to return to the boat, to navigate back along the causeway, to make the awkward transition from stone to vessel, to settle in for the return crossing. As the boat pulls away, you look back at the island, at the cave mouth growing smaller, at the columns and cliffs, and you carry with you whatever the cave gave you. Photographs, memories, sensory impressions, perhaps something harder to define, some shift in perception or mood, some sense of having encountered something genuine and significant in an age when genuine and significant encounters are increasingly rare. The journey back is different from the journey out. You've seen what you came to see. You've accomplished what you set out to accomplish, and there's a satisfaction in that, but also perhaps a slight melancholy, the awareness that the experience is ending, that you're leaving this place and may never return, that what was anticipation has become memory. The island recedes, becomes once again a shape on the horizon, and eventually disappears entirely, and you're left with only the memory and whatever tokens, photographs, video, a piece of basalt if you're dishonest, you've brought away with you. This cycle, anticipation, experience, memory, is of course universal to travel, to any significant experience, but it feels particularly acute with Fingal's cave because the cave itself is so bound up with artistic representation, because experiencing it means inevitably comparing your experience to Mendelssohn's, to Turner's, to Wordsworth's, to all the accounts you've read and images you've seen. You're never just experiencing the cave, you're experiencing the cave plus its cultural history, plus all the ways it has been interpreted and represented. This could be seen as a burden, as something that interferes with direct experience, but it can also be seen as enrichment, as additional dimensions of meaning that deepen rather than distract from the immediate encounter. Mendelssohn's Overture has become so famous, so widely performed, that for many people it has become the cave. They know the music before they know the place, and when they finally visit Staffa, they're visiting the source of something they already know and love, trying to trace the connection backward from music to stone, from art to nature. This reversal is interesting and perhaps uniquely modern. In earlier eras, people experienced places first and then encountered artistic representations of those places. But now, with global media and instant access to almost any music, we often encounter the representation before the original, know the artwork before we know its subject. This creates a different kind of pilgrimage, one where you're not discovering something new, but rather confirming something you already know, finding the physical reality behind the artistic representation. It's a kind of validation. Yes, the place exists. Yes, it looks like this. Yes, I can hear what Mendelssohn heard. Yes, the connection between place and music is real and traceable. This confirmation can be deeply satisfying, can make both the music and the place more meaningful, can create a sense of completion, of circuit closed, of understanding achieved. But it can also create disappointment if the reality doesn't match the expectation, if the place seems smaller or less impressive or different in character from what the music suggested. Music is abstract, can suggest anything, can create images in the mind that are more perfect than any physical reality. The Hebrides Overture is sublime, perfectly crafted, every note in its right place, creating an ideal representation of stormy seas and echoing caves that no actual visit can quite match. Real places have weather that's wrong, tourists who are annoying, physical discomforts that distract from aesthetic appreciation. Real places are complicated and messy in ways that art can edit out, can simplify, can perfect. Yet even acknowledging all of this, even recognizing the gap between artistic representation and physical reality, most visitors to Fingal's Cave find that the place lives up to its reputation, that it delivers on what it promises, that it is genuinely as impressive as the music suggests, in different ways perhaps, in ways that music cannot capture, but impressive nonetheless. The cave is large enough, perfect enough, resonant enough to satisfy even high expectations. It has enough genuine sublimity to match the sublimity of Mendelssohn's music. The two can coexist, can mutually reinforce, without one diminishing the other.
As conservation efforts continue, as climate change progresses, as tourism patterns evolve, the future of Fingal's Cave remains uncertain in detail, though hopefully secure in broad outline. The National Trust for Scotland's ownership should ensure protection, should prevent commercial exploitation or inappropriate development, should maintain access while managing its impact. The cave itself, barring catastrophic geological events, should remain essentially unchanged for centuries or millennia to come. Basalt is durable, erosion is slow. The columns have already stood for 60 million years and should stand for many millions more. But the context will change. Sea levels will rise, potentially altering how waves interact with the cave, possibly eventually inundating the causeway permanently, making access more difficult or impossible. Storm patterns may change, making crossings less predictable, reducing the number of days when visits are possible. The ecosystems of the Hebrides will shift in response to warming oceans and changing climate, potentially affecting the birds and marine life that are part of the experience of visiting. Tourism itself may change. Economic factors, social trends, technological developments could all affect how many people visit, how they get there, what they expect, how long they stay. Virtual reality and other technologies may eventually allow people to experience something like being in Fingal's Cave without traveling there physically. These technologies are improving rapidly, and while they cannot yet replicate the full sensory experience of actually being in a place, they may eventually come close enough to satisfy many people, to provide an experience that is valuable, even if not identical to physical presence. This raises questions about the nature of pilgrimage, about why we travel to see famous places, about what exactly we're seeking. If the goal is simply to see what the place looks like, to understand its scale and form, then good VR might eventually suffice. But if the goal is something else, to physically be there, to move through the space, to feel the cold and hear the sound, and know that you are actually present in this specific location, then no technology can substitute, no mediation can replace the direct encounter. Mendelssohn's Overture, meanwhile, will continue to be performed as long as Western classical music continues to be performed,
which is to say, indefinitely. The piece is too good, too popular, too perfectly crafted to fall out of the repertoire. Every season, orchestras around the world will perform it, will introduce new audiences to it, will maintain the connection between music and place that Mendelssohn established nearly 2 centuries ago. The music ensures that Fingal's Cave remains famous, that new generations learn about it, that people who have never been to Scotland and may never go still know about this small island and its remarkable cavern. This is a kind of immortality, a way that a place becomes fixed in cultural memory, becomes part of the permanent human heritage, becomes known not just to those who encounter it directly, but to anyone who encounters the art it inspired. This relationship between place and art is one of the great gifts of human creativity, one of the ways we make meaning, one of the methods by which particular experiences become universal, by which local phenomena become globally significant. Fingal's Cave is a specific place, located at specific coordinates, accessible only with difficulty, experienced by a relative handful of people. But the Hebrides Overture is everywhere, performed in concert halls worldwide, recorded hundreds of times, available instantly to anyone with internet access. The music carries the cave outward, disseminates it, makes it accessible in a different mode, transforms a geological phenomenon into a cultural one. And yet the relationship is not one-directional. The cave is not simply source material that the music draws upon and exhausts. The cave continues to exist independently, continues to inspire directly those who visit it, continues to be itself, regardless of how it has been represented in music or any other art form. The music points toward the cave, creates desire to experience it, but cannot replace it. The two exist in a kind of mutual relationship, each enhancing the other, each making the other more meaningful, neither complete without the other. This is perhaps the deepest lesson of Fingal's Cave and the Hebrides Overture, that nature and art are not opposed, not competitive, but rather complementary, mutually reinforcing, partners in the creation of meaning and beauty. The cave is beautiful in itself, independent of human observation or interpretation. But human observation and interpretation add something, create additional layers of meaning, additional ways of engaging with and understanding the place. The music is beautiful in itself, independent of any reference to specific places or experiences. But knowing what it refers to, understanding its origins, hearing it with knowledge of the cave adds dimension to the listening experience, creates connections between abstract sound and concrete reality.
We live in an age that often emphasizes the distinction between nature and culture, that sees them as separate spheres, perhaps even opposed. But Fingal's Cave and Mendelssohn's Overture suggest a different understanding, one where nature and culture interpenetrate, where geology becomes music and music reflects geology, where the boundaries between the natural and the human-made become permeable, where beauty arises from the interaction between world and consciousness, between what is there and how we perceive it. Standing at the entrance to Fingal's Cave, you stand at one of those liminal spaces where this interaction is particularly clear, particularly powerful. The stone is nature, untouched by human hands, formed by processes that occurred millions of years before humans existed. The experience of the stone is culture, shaped by what you bring to it, by your expectations and knowledge and aesthetic sensibility, by everything you are and everything your culture has made you. The two cannot be separated. You cannot experience the stone purely, without interpretation, without the filters of perception and understanding. But neither can you experience only your own projections. The stone is really there, really has the properties it has, really constrains and shapes what you perceive. The cave is both fact and meaning, both objective reality and subjective experience, both thing in itself and thing as perceived. It is stone arranged by cooling lava, columns formed by physical stresses, a chamber eroded by waves. It is also a cathedral, a musical instrument, a sublime space, an inspiration, a pilgrimage site, a work of art that nature made. All of these descriptions are true simultaneously, none cancel out the others, and the richest understanding holds them all together, appreciates all dimensions, refuses to reduce the cave to only one category or one type of significance. Mendelssohn understood this intuitively. His overture is not program music in a simple sense, not just an attempt to reproduce the sounds he heard. It is rather a translation, a transformation, and interpretation that acknowledges both the physical reality of the cave and his own creative response to it. He heard waves and stone and wind, but he also heard music, and what he wrote down was the intersection of these two modes of hearing, the place where nature and art meet and merge. We are the beneficiaries of his genius, of his ability to capture that intersection in a form that can be shared and preserved and experienced by others. Through his music, we can access something of what he felt, can participate in his experience even though we were not there, can understand something about the cave even if we never visit it. This is what art does at its best. It preserves and transmits experience, makes the private public, transforms the momentary into the permanent, creates bridges across time and space that allow humans to share what they have seen and felt and understood. The waves continue to strike Fingal's cave, just as they have for millions of years, just as they will for millions more. The basalt columns continue to stand, eroding slowly, infinitesimally slowly by human perception, but eroding nonetheless, the cave gradually changing shape across timescales we cannot perceive directly. The island sits in its waters, remote and exposed, subject to weather and tide, indifferent to human attention, continuing to exist whether anyone visits or not, whether anyone cares or not. But humans do visit, do care, do find meaning and beauty in this particular arrangement of volcanic rock and Atlantic waves. We make the journey, endure the difficulties, stand at the entrance, listen to the sound, feel the spray, take our photographs and carry away our memories. We listen to Mendelssohn's overture and hear the cave in the music, hear the waves in the orchestral textures, hear the genius of a young composer who could translate stone into sound, who could hear music in the crash of surf, who could create something that has outlasted him and will outlast all of us, that has become as permanent as anything human can be, that will be performed and loved as long as humans make music and value beauty. Fingal's cave stands as a reminder that the world is full of wonders, that nature creates beauty without intention, that geology can be as inspiring as any human art, that some places have the power to move us deeply, to speak to something fundamental in human consciousness, to connect us to forces and timescales far larger than ourselves. It stands also as a reminder that human creativity can respond to these natural wonders, can transform them through art, can add human meaning to natural fact, can create something new that neither diminishes the original nor merely copies it, but rather exists alongside it, complementing it, enriching our understanding of both nature and art. The melodic basalt columns continue their silent song, singing to the waves, singing to the wind, singing to anyone who takes the time to listen. Mendelssohn listened, truly listened, and what he heard changed music history, created one of the enduring masterpieces of the Romantic era, ensured that a tiny Scottish island would be known and celebrated far beyond what its size or location would otherwise warrant.
The cave inspired the music, and the music has returned that gift, has given the cave a kind of fame and permanence that stone alone, however perfect, could never achieve. This is the final truth of Fingal's cave. It is both itself and more than itself, both a geological formation and a cultural icon, both a physical place and an idea, both stone and song. To experience it fully requires both modes of knowing, the direct sensory encounter with the actual place and the mediated artistic encounter with Mendelssohn's interpretation. Together, they create an understanding that is richer than either alone could provide, that honors both the natural world and human creativity, that recognizes both as sources of beauty and meaning.
The story of Fingal's cave continues to unfold, continues to be written by each visitor who makes the journey, by each musician who performs the overture, by each person who encounters either the place or the music and is moved by what they find. It is an ongoing story, not finished, not complete, still adding chapters. But at its center is that moment in August 1829 when a young man stood at the cave entrance and heard not just waves, but music, not just nature, but art waiting to be born, and had the genius to capture what he heard, to share it with the world, to create something that would endure. The cave itself, indifferent to human narratives, continues its slow geological evolution, continues to sound its note, continues to wait for those who will make the journey, who will listen carefully, who will allow themselves to be moved by the meeting of stone and sea, by the architecture that nature builds when given 60 million years and the right materials, by the music that emerges when waves strike basalt in a chamber tuned by accident to resonate with something deep in the human spirit. And so we return, as all contemplations of Fingal's cave must eventually return, to the essential mystery. Not the mystery of how the columns formed, for that we understand through geology, nor the mystery of why the cave resonates as it does, for that we understand through acoustics, but the deeper mystery of why this particular place affects us as it does, why it has the power to move composers to create masterpieces, to inspire artists across centuries, to draw visitors across thousands of miles, to stand on a slippery causeway and peer into darkness and feel that they have encountered something significant, something that matters in ways that are difficult to articulate but impossible to deny. Perhaps the answer lies in the perfection. The columns are so regular, so geometric, so impossibly precise that they violate our expectations about what nature produces randomly. We're accustomed to natural forms being irregular, organic, flowing rather than angular, approximate rather than exact. But here, nature has created geometry that would satisfy a mathematician, has produced hexagons that would challenge a craftsman to duplicate, has built an architecture that seems designed even though we know it was not. This violation of expectation creates a kind of cognitive dissonance that resolves into wonder. We cannot quite believe what we are seeing, cannot reconcile the evidence of our eyes with our understanding of how natural processes work, and the gap between perception and understanding becomes a space where awe can flourish. Or perhaps the answer lies in the scale. The cave is large enough to be impressive, to create that sense of human smallness before natural grandeur that the sublime requires, but it is not so large to be incomprehensible, not so vast that we cannot take it in, cannot perceive its extent and structure. It is, in a sense, perfectly scaled to human perception, large enough to overwhelm, but not so enormous that we cannot grasp it. This sweet spot of scale between the intimate and the overwhelming, between the comprehensible and the infinite, may be part of what makes the cave so affecting. Or perhaps the answer is the sound.
Humans are deeply responsive to sound, to rhythm and tone and resonance. We are musical creatures, capable of being moved by organized sound in ways we do not fully understand, capable of perceiving patterns and relationships in the auditory realm that speak to something deeper than conscious thought. The cave, through its acoustic properties, provides a natural soundscape that has musical qualities, that approaches what we recognize as music without quite achieving it, that suggests music waiting to be completed, waiting for human intervention to transform natural sound into art. This suggestion, this potential, this sense of almost music may be what Mendelssohn responded to so immediately and what continues to affect musicians and music lovers who visit. Or perhaps the answer is simpler and more complex simultaneously. Perhaps the cave affects us because it is beautiful, and beauty affects us, and we do not need to explain further. Beauty is its own justification, its own reason for valuing something, its own explanation for why we are moved. The cave is beautiful in multiple ways: visually, through the perfection of its forms; acoustically, through the quality of its sound; spatially, through the dimensions and proportions of the chamber; even temporally, through the rhythm of the waves. This multi-dimensional beauty, engaging multiple senses simultaneously, creating an experience that is richer than any single sensory mode could provide, may be sufficient explanation for the cave's power.
But explanations, however thorough, however plausible, always seem inadequate when faced with actual experience. The gap between understanding why something should be beautiful and actually experiencing its beauty remains unbridgeable. You can understand every aspect of the cave, the geology, the acoustics, the history, the cultural significance, and still be surprised by the actual experience. Still find that direct encounter exceeds what understanding led you to expect. This is perhaps the most important lesson, that knowledge enhances experience but does not replace it. That understanding adds to appreciation but does not diminish wonder. That we can know everything about something and still find mystery in it, still find that it exceeds our categories and explanations, still find that it is more than the sum of what we can say about it. Mendelssohn's Overture embodies this relationship between understanding and experience. It is a work that can be analyzed exhaustively. Its form can be charted, its harmonies explained, its orchestration studied, its place in music history documented. Musicians and scholars have written thousands of pages about it, have examined every measure, have placed it in every relevant context. But all of this analysis, all of this understanding does not exhaust the piece, does not make it predictable or routine, does not eliminate the pleasure of listening to it or the wonder of experiencing how well it captures something essential about its subject. The music remains more than what can be said about it, continues to move listeners even when those listeners understand exactly how it achieves its effects, continues to seem fresh and immediate even after countless performances across nearly 2 centuries. This quality of being analyzable yet inexhaustible, understandable yet mysterious, known yet still capable of surprise, characterizes the greatest works of art and the greatest natural phenomena equally. Fingal's Cave has it, the Hebrides Overture has it, the relationship between them has it. And this quality is perhaps what we should value most, what we should work hardest to preserve and protect, what we should be most grateful for. In a world that increasingly seems entirely known, entirely mapped and measured and explained, where mystery is treated as a problem to be solved rather than a value to be cherished, places and artworks that retain the capacity to surprise and move us, that maintain their mystery even in the face of complete understanding, are precious beyond measure. The conservation of Fingal's Cave, then, is not just about protecting stone and managing tourism. It is about preserving a place where this kind of experience remains possible, where humans can encounter something that moves them in ways they cannot fully explain, where the natural world demonstrates its capacity to create beauty and meaning without human intervention.
It is about maintaining access to the sublime, to experiences that remind us of our place in a universe that is larger and older and more complex than we can fully grasp, that existed long before we did and will continue long after we are gone. Similarly, the continued performance of Mendelssohn's Overture is not just about maintaining a popular piece in the orchestral repertoire. It is about preserving an example of how human creativity can respond to natural beauty, how art can capture and transmit experience, how a moment of inspiration can be transformed into something permanent and shareable. It is about honoring the connection between nature and culture, between place and music, between the stone and the sound. The two preservation efforts, of the cave and of the music, are really aspects of a single larger preservation, a preservation of the relationship itself, of the idea that places can inspire art and art can illuminate places, that the physical and the aesthetic are not separate realms but interpenetrating dimensions of a single reality. This understanding, increasingly rare in an age that tends to compartmentalize and separate, that sees the world as divided into discrete categories with walls between them, is worth preserving as much as the specific cave or the specific composition. Fingal's cave will continue to weather and erode, slowly, imperceptibly by human timescales, but inevitably. Eventually, in some distant future, the cave will collapse, the columns will fall, the sea will reclaim the space, and this particular configuration of stone will cease to exist. This is the nature of all geological formations. They are not eternal, not permanent, only durable on timescales that make them seem eternal to humans. Everything stone becomes sand eventually, given sufficient time. The cave we see today is different from the cave Mendelssohn saw, though the differences are too subtle to perceive without careful measurement. The cave of 1,000 years hence will be different from today's cave, though again, the changes will be gradual, barely noticeable except in aggregate. But the Hebrides Overture, barring the collapse of human civilization and the loss of all cultural memory, could genuinely last forever. Music, once created and transmitted, can be preserved indefinitely, can be copied without degradation, can be performed again and again without using up the original. The notes Mendelssohn wrote down in 1829 can be played today exactly as he intended, can be played 1,000 years from now if humans still perform orchestral music, can potentially be played as long as humans or any other intelligent beings exist and care about preserving human cultural achievements. The music is, in a sense, immortal in ways the stone is not.
This creates a strange inversion. The natural formation that inspired the artwork will eventually disappear, but the artwork will outlast it. Future generations may perform the Hebrides Overture when Fingal's cave no longer exists, when Staffa itself has eroded away, when the exact configuration of stone that inspired Mendelssohn is lost to geological time. The music will preserve the memory of the place, will be the only way future listeners can access anything of what Mendelssohn experienced, will become in effect more real, more accessible, more permanent than the physical reality it was based on. This is both sobering and wonderful. Sobering because it reminds us of impermanence, of the fact that nothing physical lasts forever, that even stone crumbles, that the world we know will not always exist in its current form. But wonderful because it demonstrates the power of art, the way human creativity can capture and preserve experiences, can make the temporary permanent, can defeat time even if it cannot defeat entropy. The cave will fall, but the music will remain. And through the music, something of the cave will remain as well, will be accessible to people who will never have the opportunity to visit the physical site, who will live in a future when the Hebrides may be different, when the climate may have changed, when the world may be transformed in ways we cannot imagine. But when Mendelssohn's notes can still be played, can still evoke something of what he felt on that August day in 1829. This raises questions about the nature of preservation, about what exactly we are trying to preserve when we work to protect significant places. Are we preserving the physical object, the stone, the configuration of columns, the acoustic space? Or are we preserving the experience, the opportunity for future generations to stand where we stood, to see what we saw, to feel what we felt? Or are we preserving the meaning, the cultural significance, the historical associations, the role the place plays in our collective imagination? Most likely, we are trying to preserve all three, recognizing that they are interconnected, that the physical object enables the experience and the experience creates the meaning, that you cannot preserve one without the others. But as the case of Fingal's Cave and the Hebrides Overture shows, meaning can outlast physical presence, can be carried forward through art even when the original source is lost. This does not make physical preservation unimportant. Direct experience of places remains valuable, remains different from and irreplaceable by artistic representation, but it does suggest that preservation is not just about protecting physical objects, but also about maintaining cultural memory, about ensuring that stories and artworks and knowledge about significant places survive, even if the places themselves eventually do not. The relationship between Fingal's Cave and Mendelssohn's Overture thus becomes a kind of model, an example of how places and art can work together to create meaning that is more durable than either alone. The cave without the music is impressive but eventually forgettable, one among many remarkable geological formations, known to those who visit it but lacking broader cultural resonance. The music without the cave would be beautiful but abstract, lacking the concrete referent that gives it additional dimension and meaning. Together, they create something larger than their sum, a cultural complex that includes the physical place, the artistic response to it, the history of both, and the ongoing relationship between them. This kind of cultural complex, where place and art and history and meaning are all woven together, is relatively rare, requires specific circumstances to develop, depends on the right combination of factors. The place must be remarkable enough to inspire artistic response. The artistic response must be skilled enough to be worth preserving. The historical circumstances must be such that the connection between place and art is recorded and remembered, and the cultural context must value both the place and the art enough to preserve them and maintain their relationship across time. Fingal's Cave and the Hebrides Overture meet all these criteria, which is why their relationship has endured, why we still care about both, why the connection between them remains meaningful nearly 2 centuries after Mendelssohn's visit. Other examples exist, though they are not common. Tintern Abbey and Wordsworth's poem about it, the Lake District and the Romantic poets who celebrated it, the American West and the landscape paintings and photography that shaped how Americans understood it. In each case, a place inspired art, and the art changed how the place was perceived and valued, creating a feedback loop where each enhanced the other, where neither can now be fully understood without reference to the other. These relationships between places and artworks are part of our cultural heritage, as worthy of preservation and study as either places or artworks alone. As we look to the future, as we consider how to maintain these relationships, how to keep them alive and meaningful for future generations, several challenges emerge. Physical access to places like Fingal's Cave is likely to become more difficult. Climate change, rising sea levels, increased storm intensity all threaten to make the cave less accessible, harder to visit safely, perhaps eventually impossible to reach at all. How do we maintain the place's cultural significance when direct experience becomes rare or impossible? How do we keep the connection to Mendelssohn's music meaningful when people can no longer stand where he stood and hear what he heard?
Technology offers partial solutions. Virtual reality could allow people to experience something like being in the cave without physically traveling there. High-quality recordings could capture the sound of the waves inside the cave, could be synchronized with performances of the overture, could create multimedia experiences that approach the richness of actual presence.
Digital preservation could ensure that every aspect of the cave is documented, measured, recorded, so that even if the physical structure is lost, knowledge of it remains complete and accessible. But these technological solutions, however sophisticated, remain substitutes for direct experience, remain mediated where the original is immediate, remain representations where the original is reality. They have value, certainly, and as access to the physical site becomes more difficult, they become increasingly important. But they should be understood as complements to, rather than replacements for, direct experience, as ways of making the cave and its significance accessible to more people, but not as equal to actually being there. Perhaps the most important preservation work is not physical or technological, but educational and cultural, ensuring that people understand why Fingal's cave matters, why Mendelssohn's response to it was significant, why the relationship between place and music is worth caring about. This requires teaching, requires keeping the stories alive, requires performing the overture and explaining its origins, requires maintaining Staffa as a protected site and encouraging visitation when possible, requires writing and thinking and talking about the cave and the music and their connection. It requires, in short, keeping the cultural complex alive, active, evolving, relevant to contemporary concerns and contemporary consciousness. This is not a matter of freezing things as they were in 1829, of trying to preserve Mendelssohn's experience exactly as he had it, of treating the cave and the music as museum pieces locked in the past. Rather, it is about allowing the relationship to continue, to grow, to adapt to new circumstances while maintaining continuity with its history. It is about new visitors having their own experiences of the cave, experiences that will be different from Mendelssohn's, but no less valid, no less valuable. It is about new performances of the overture that bring new interpretations, new emphases, new insights, while still respecting Mendelssohn's intentions and the work's connection to its inspiration. It is about the past informing the present without imprisoning it, about tradition providing foundation without becoming constraint. The story of Fingal's cave, then, is not a story with an ending, not a narrative that concludes with Mendelssohn's composition or with any subsequent development. It is an ongoing story, still being written, still unfolding, still open to new chapters and new interpretations. Each person who visits the cave adds to the story. Each performance of the overture extends it. Each person who learns about the connection between place and music, who comes to understand why it matters, who cares enough to want to preserve it for future generations, participates in keeping the story alive, in ensuring that it continues. And this, finally, is what Fingal's Cave and the Hebrides Overture teach us, that stories matter, that connections between things matter, that the relationships we build between nature and culture, between places and artworks, between the physical and the meaningful, are as important as the individual elements themselves. The cave is remarkable stone, the overture is remarkable music, but the connection between them, the story of how one inspired the other, the ongoing relationship that continues to enrich both, the way each makes the other more meaningful, this is perhaps most remarkable of all. It reminds us that we live in a world that is not just matter and energy, not just physical processes operating according to natural law, but also meaning and significance, stories and connections, relationships between things that transcend the things themselves. It reminds us that human consciousness, human creativity, human capacity to perceive beauty and meaning and connection adds something to the universe, creates something that would not exist without us, transforms the world from something that merely is into something that also means, that also matters, that also tells stories. The basalt columns of Fingal's cave would exist without humans, would have formed regardless of whether any conscious being ever observed them.
But they would not mean anything without observers, would not be beautiful to anyone, would not inspire art or poetry or music. Meaning requires consciousness to receive it. Beauty requires perception to experience it. Inspiration requires minds capable of being inspired. The cave needs us as much as we need it, not to exist, but to be significant, to be meaningful, to be more than just stone and water and sound. And we need the cave, need places like it, need experiences that move us beyond ordinary consciousness, that connect us to forces and timescales larger than ourselves, that remind us that the universe is full of wonders, that beauty exists independent of our creation of it, that nature builds cathedrals without architects, composes symphonies without composers, creates art without artists. We need these reminders because they humble us appropriately, because they connect us to something larger than human affairs, because they provide perspective on our own significance and insignificance simultaneously. Mendelssohn, standing at the cave entrance in 1829, experienced something that we can still experience today, that people may still experience centuries hence. The specific details of his experience were unique to him, shaped by his particular sensibility, his musical training, his historical moment. But the essential experience of encountering something sublime, of being moved by natural beauty, of feeling small before something vast and old and indifferent to human concerns, this is universal, available to anyone who makes the journey, who stands in that place, who opens themselves to what it offers. The music he created from that experience has become universal, has traveled far beyond its origins, has moved millions of listeners who know nothing of the cave, who may never have heard of Staffa, who respond to the music purely as music, without reference to its programmatic content. But for those who know the connection, who understand the relationship, who can hear the cave in the music and hear the music in the cave, an additional dimension opens, a richer experience becomes available, a more complete understanding emerges.
This is what art at its best accomplishes. It takes the particular and makes it universal, takes the private and makes it public, takes the momentary and makes it permanent. Mendelssohn's moment at Fingal's cave was his own, unique, unrepeatable. But through his music, he shared that moment, allowed others to participate in it, created a way for his experience to become, in some sense, everyone's experience. The music does not replace direct encounter with the cave, but it offers an alternative route to something of the same essential experience, offers accessibility to those for whom physical travel is impossible, offers a different mode of engagement with the same underlying reality. And so the cave and the music continue together, partners in the creation and preservation of meaning, each supporting and enhancing the other, each making the other more significant, more valuable, more worthy of attention and care. The stones stand, and the waves crash, and the sound echoes as they have for millions of years. The music is performed, and the notes resound, and audiences listen as they have for nearly 200 years. The connection between them is maintained, is celebrated, is passed forward to new generations who discover both the cave and the music, and the relationship between them. In the end, perhaps this is enough, that the cave exists, that the music exists, that the connection between them is known and valued, that people continue to care about both, that the story continues to be told. Perhaps this is all we can ask for, all we should hope for. The cave will eventually fall. Human civilization will eventually end. All our stories and all our music will eventually be forgotten. But for now, in this moment, in this era of human history, Fingal's cave stands, and the Hebrides Overture is performed, and the relationship between them remains alive and meaningful. That is no small thing. In a universe that tends toward entropy, toward disorder, toward the dissolution of all structure and meaning. The fact that humans can create order, can build meaning, can maintain connections across time and space and changing circumstances, this is remarkable. This is valuable. This is worth celebrating and preserving and passing forward. Fingal's Cave and Mendelssohn's Overture are one example among many, but a particularly beautiful example, a particularly clear demonstration of what humans can do when we engage deeply with the world around us, when we respond to beauty with creativity, when we transform experience into art that can be shared. The melodic basalt columns will continue their song, accompanied now and forever by Mendelssohn's interpretation of that song, by the music that has become inseparable from the stone, by the overture that ensures the cave's fame and significance far beyond what geology alone could provide. Together they stand, place and artwork, nature and culture, stone and sound, as testament to the human capacity to perceive beauty, to be moved by it, to respond to it creatively, and to create from that response something that endures, something that matters, something that adds to rather than subtracts from the sum of meaning and beauty in the universe. And that, in the end, is the true story of Fingal's Cave. Not just the story of how it formed, not just the story of how it was discovered and popularized, not just the story of how it inspired Mendelssohn, but the larger story of how places and people and art interact to create meaning, how the physical world and the world of consciousness meet and merge, how nature provides the raw materials that human creativity transforms into culture. It is a story that continues, that invites participation, that asks each new generation to encounter both the cave and the music, to find in them whatever meaning speaks to contemporary concerns, to add new chapters even while honoring what has come before. The invitation stands, the cave waits, the music plays on, and the story continues, always continuing, never quite complete, always open to new interpretations, new experiences, new connections. This is as it should be. This is how meaning is maintained across time, not by freezing it, not by treating it as finished and complete, but by allowing it to live, to grow, to adapt, to remain relevant and vital and capable of moving new audiences, new visitors, new listeners who discover in both the cave and the music something that speaks to them, that moves them, that connects them to something larger than themselves, that reminds them why beauty matters and why places matter, and why the human capacity to respond to both with creativity and care is one of our precious capabilities, one of the things that makes us human. One of the ways we create meaning in a universe that provides opportunity for meaning, but does not create it without our participation. The waves crash, the columns stand, the sound sounds, and humans, small and temporary, but capable of perception and creation and love, continue to be moved by all three, continue to find in them something worth preserving, worth caring about, worth passing forward to future generations as part of the inheritance of beauty and meaning that makes human life not just bearable, but rich, not just survivable, but meaningful, not just possible, but worthwhile. The sun sets over the Hebrides as it has countless times before, casting its changing light across the waves that surround Staffa. The island sits in its waters, unmoved by the passage of days and seasons and centuries, patient in its existence, making no demands, offering no explanations, simply being what it is, a remnant of volcanic fire, a collection of cooled lava, a configuration of stone that happens through the accidents of physics and the slow work of erosion to create forms and sounds that move human consciousness in particular ways.
Inside Fingal's Cave, the light fades differently than it does in open spaces. The entrance glows with the day's last brightness, while the interior darkens into absolute black, creating a gradient from light to dark that shifts minute by minute as the sun descends toward the horizon.
The waves continue their work, unchanged by the hour, unchanged by the light or its absence, following rhythms established by wind and tide and the gravitational pull of the moon. Rhythms that have nothing to do with human perception or human schedules, that operate according to their own logic, their own time. A boat full of visitors has long since departed, has made its way back to Mull or Iona, has delivered its passengers back to their accommodations, where they will review their photographs, will replay in their minds what they saw and heard, will try to capture in words or images what they experienced, will inevitably find that words and images are insufficient, that something essential escapes documentation, that the experience was richer and stranger and more moving than any record of it can convey. This too is part of the pattern, part of the ongoing story, the gap between experience and representation, between being there and remembering having been there, between the immediate encounter and the mediated recall. Some of those visitors will seek out recordings of the Hebrides Overture when they return home, will listen to the music with new understanding, will hear the cave in the orchestral textures, will recognize the waves in Mendelssohn's themes, will experience the music differently now that they have stood where he stood, now that they carry their own memories of the place. The music will bring back the cold and the spray and the dark columns and the resonant sound, will trigger recall in ways that photographs alone cannot, will create a multi-sensory memory that is richer than any single modality could provide. This too is part of Mendelssohn's gift, not just the music itself, but the bridge he created between place and sound, the way his composition allows listeners to access something of the cave even in its absence, even in the warmth and safety and comfort of a concert hall far from the Atlantic winds. Other visitors will have different responses, will perhaps find that the cave did not affect them as deeply as they expected, will be disappointed that their experience did not match the accounts they had read or the expectations they had formed. This is inevitable and not shameful. Not every place speaks to every person. Not every moment is the right moment for profound experience. Not every visitor comes to a famous site with the right combination of circumstances and state of mind to be deeply moved. The cave cannot perform on demand, cannot guarantee sublime experiences, cannot be reduced to an attraction that delivers predictable results. It is more difficult than that, more honest than that, more real than that. It offers itself without promises, without guarantees, and what each person makes of that offering depends on factors that cannot be controlled or predicted. But for at least some, and historically for many, the cave delivers something genuine and powerful, something that justifies the journey and the discomfort and the expense, something that becomes part of their permanent memory, part of the catalogue of significant experiences that shape how they understand themselves and the world. These are the visitors who leave changed, even if only slightly, even if only in ways they cannot quite articulate. These are the ones who will return in memory to the cave repeatedly, who will find themselves thinking about it at unexpected moments, who will recognize that something happened there, some shift in perspective or perception, some deepening of appreciation for beauty or nature or the relationship between the two. As darkness completes its claim on the cave, as the interior becomes truly black, as even the entrance fades to dim gray, the acoustic character of the space changes subtly. Sound behaves differently in darkness, or rather, our perception of sound changes when vision is removed or diminished, when we must rely more heavily on auditory information, when the normal dominance of vision in human perception is reduced. The waves sound louder, perhaps, or more complex, or more present. The echoes seem more distinct.
The cave feels larger, more mysterious, more like the realm of legend and myth than like a geological formation that can be measured and explained. This shift between daylight experience and darkness, between the visible and the audible, between what can be seen and what must be heard, is part of the cave's character, part of what makes it more than just an interesting rock formation. It operates on multiple sensory channels, engages multiple modes of perception, cannot be fully appreciated through any single sense alone. This multi-sensory quality is part of what Mendelssohn captured, not just the sound, but the totality of the experience, the way sight and sound and touch and even smell, the salt air, the mineral scent of wet stone, combine to create something that is more than the sum of sensory parts. In concert halls around the world, on this particular evening, as on most evenings, orchestras are performing. Somewhere, quite possibly, a conductor is raising a baton to begin the Hebrides Overture, is preparing to lead musicians through Mendelssohn's carefully crafted notation, is about to create, through the organized efforts of dozens of trained performers, a sonic representation of a place most of the musicians have never seen, a cave that exists thousands of miles from where they sit with their instruments, waiting for the downbeat.
The music begins, the violas and cellos and bassoons with their rising and falling figure, immediately establishing the motion of waves, immediately creating the sense of water and rhythm and constant movement. The audience settles into listening mode, allows the music to wash over them, allows Mendelssohn to take them on a journey to a place some of them know and many do not, to an island in the Hebrides, to a cave that has inspired wonder for centuries, to an experience that happened nearly 200 years ago, but which the music makes present, makes immediate, makes accessible here and now, in this concert hall, in this city, on this evening. Some listeners know the program, have read the program notes, understand what the music represents. They listen with images of the cave in mind, with knowledge of Mendelssohn's visit, with awareness of the connection between place and composition. Others know nothing of any of this, hear only music, respond to it as pure sound, appreciate its craftsmanship and beauty without any extra musical reference. Both modes of listening are valid, both access something real about the piece, and the fact that the music works equally well for both audiences, the informed and the uninformed, those who know the program and those who don't, testifies to Mendelssohn's skill, to his ability to create something that functions as both absolute music and program music, that satisfies both as pure formal construction and as representation of specific experience. The performance continues. The music develops, the themes are transformed and elaborated, the dynamics shift from quiet to loud and back again, the orchestral colors change as different instruments carry the melody or support with harmony or provide rhythmic drive. The conductor shapes phrases, indicates dynamics, brings out inner voices, interprets Mendelssohn's notation in ways that are slightly different from any other conductor's interpretation, adding a personal element to the music while still remaining faithful to what the composer wrote. This is the nature of musical performance. It is both interpretation and preservation, both creative act and act of fidelity, both new and old simultaneously. And somewhere, listening, perhaps in the hall, perhaps at home via recording, perhaps encountering the music for the first time or the 100th, someone is moved. The music speaks to them, connects with something in their experience or their emotion or their aesthetic sensibility. Perhaps they have visited the cave and the music brings back memories. Perhaps they have never seen the Hebrides, but the music makes them want to.
Perhaps they know nothing of any of that, but simply find the music beautiful, find themselves carried along by its currents, find that it creates feeling and mood and response in ways they cannot explain, but which are nonetheless real and powerful. This is what music does when it succeeds. It crosses boundaries, transcends explanations, operates directly on consciousness in ways that bypass rational analysis. You cannot argue someone into being moved by music, cannot explain why one piece speaks to you and another doesn't, cannot reduce aesthetic response to any simple formula or theory. The music either works or it doesn't, either moves you or leaves you unmoved, either creates meaning or remains merely pleasant sound. And when it works, when it genuinely moves you, when it creates that peculiar state where you are both yourself and somehow more than yourself, both individual consciousness and participant in something larger, that is a gift, that is grace. That is one of the things that makes being human worthwhile. The cave and the music, separated by geography and by the category distinction between nature and art, are nevertheless connected, are part of a single phenomenon, are two aspects of a larger whole that includes also Mendelssohn's experience, the history of the cave's fame, the ongoing stream of visitors and listeners, the cultural complex that has grown up around both. This larger phenomenon cannot be reduced to either cave or music alone, exists in the relationship between them, in the stories that connect them, in the attention and care that humans have devoted to both, in the meaning that has been created through their association. And this meaning is not static, not fixed, not determined once and for all by Mendelssohn or by any subsequent interpreter. It continues to evolve, continues to be shaped by each new encounter, each new performance, each new visitor to the cave or listener to the music. The meaning is not something that exists independent of engagement. It is created through engagement, through the active participation of consciousness, through the work of perception and interpretation and response. The cave and the music provide the raw materials, but the meaning emerges from the interaction between these raw materials and the humans who encounter them. This is a more active, more participatory understanding of meaning than we sometimes acknowledge. We often speak as if meaning is something that resides in objects or artworks, something that can be extracted or discovered, something that exists whether or not anyone perceives it. But meaning may be better understood as something that happens in the encounter between subject and object, between consciousness and world, between the human capacity for perception and interpretation and the things that present themselves to be perceived and interpreted. The cave has certain properties, dimensions, materials, acoustic characteristics. The music has certain properties, notes, rhythms, harmonies, structure. But the meaning of either emerges only when someone encounters them, engages with them, brings to them the full range of human perceptual and interpretive capabilities. This suggests that preservation is not just about maintaining physical objects or written scores, but about maintaining the conditions for meaningful encounter, about ensuring that future generations have the opportunity to engage with both the cave and the music in ways that meaning can emerge, that support rather than hinder the creation of significance.
Education, in this sense, is a form of preservation as important as any physical protection. A generation that knows nothing of Fingal's cave, that has never heard the Hebrides Overture, that lacks the context to understand why the connection between them matters, such a generation has lost something valuable, even if both cave and musical score remain physically intact. The physical objects are necessary but not sufficient. They must be accompanied by knowledge, by cultural memory, by the stories and contexts that make them significant rather than merely extant. This is why writing about the cave matters, why performing the overture matters, why teaching students about both matters, why maintaining Staffa as a protected site that people can visit matters. Each of these activities participates in the preservation not just of objects, but of meaning, not just of physical things, but of the capacity for those things to speak to human consciousness, to move human emotion, to create the experiences that make them valuable. Without these activities, without this ongoing work of cultural transmission and preservation, the cave would remain stone and the music would remain notes, but the relationship between them would fade, the story would be lost, the meaning would dissipate. The night deepens over Staffa. The cave is now completely dark inside, visible from outside only as a darker patch in the dark cliff, identifiable only if you know exactly where to look. The waves continue their work, mechanical, tireless, indifferent. The island sits in its cold waters, surrounded by darkness and sea and the vast empty spaces of the North Atlantic stretching away to the west. No boats approach, no visitors come, no one witnesses or records or experiences. The cave exists in its own right, for itself, as it has existed for millions of years before humans arrived, and as it will exist after we are gone, if the geologically brief span of human existence ends while the stone endures. This existence in itself, this reality independent of observation, is important to acknowledge. The cave does not need us, does not exist for us, would continue perfectly well if we disappeared tomorrow. Its beauty is not dependent on our perception of it. Its acoustic properties would continue to operate whether or not any ear was present to hear them. Its geological significance is a fact about the world, regardless of whether anyone studies or understands it. We must maintain humility about our role. We do not create the beauty we perceive, we only perceive it. We do not make the cave significant, we only recognize significance that is there, independent of our recognition. And yet, our perception does add something, does create something that would not exist without consciousness. A universe without observers is a universe without meaning, without beauty, without value. Not because these things require consciousness to exist in some objective sense, but because meaning and beauty and value are relational categories, exist only in the relationship between things and the consciousness that perceives them. The cave has certain properties independent of observation, but those properties become meaningful, become beautiful, become valuable only when consciousness encounters them and responds. This is not to diminish either the cave or consciousness, not to make one subordinate to the other, but rather to recognize that both are necessary, that meaning emerges from their interaction, that neither alone is sufficient. The cave without consciousness is merely stone. Consciousness without the cave, without something to perceive, without objects in the world that can be encountered and experienced, is empty, has nothing to work with, no raw material from which to create meaning. Together, cave and consciousness create something neither could create alone: the experience of beauty, the perception of significance, the meaning that makes the cave more than just stone and makes consciousness more than just abstract capacity. Mendelssohn's overture embodies this understanding. The music is his consciousness responding to the cave, his perception transformed into sound, his experience made communicable through the medium of composition. The music does not replace the cave, does not claim to be the cave, but it is also not separate from the cave, not unrelated to it. It is the cave as experienced by a particular consciousness at a particular moment, translated into a medium that allows that experience to be shared, to be accessed by others who may have different experiences of the cave, or no direct experience at all, but who can participate in Mendelssohn's experience through the music he created. This is the miracle of art, not that it copies reality, not that it reproduces experience directly, but that it translates experience into forms that can be shared, that it makes the private public, that it allows communication of things that cannot be communicated through ordinary language or direct description. Music cannot tell you what Fingal's cave looks like, cannot describe the exact dimensions or the precise acoustic properties, but it can convey what the experience of being there felt like to Mendelssohn, can communicate something essential about his response, can allow you to participate in that response even across the gulf of time and circumstance that separates you from his original experience. And when you visit the cave yourself, if you are fortunate enough to do so, the music accompanies you, informs your perception, shapes your experience in ways both subtle and profound. You hear the waves and you think of Mendelssohn's opening theme. You see the columns and you remember the formal perfection of the musical structure. You feel the sublime power of the place and recognize it as what Mendelssohn was trying to capture. The music has prepared you, has given you a framework for understanding what you're experiencing, has connected you to a tradition of response that goes back 2 centuries. You are not alone in your encounter with the cave. You are accompanied by Mendelssohn and by all the others who have visited and been moved, by the accumulated weight of attention and interpretation and response that made this place significant.
This accumulated attention, this tradition of response, is itself part of what makes places like Fingal's Cave valuable. They become nodes in cultural networks, points where different streams of meaning intersect, places that gather significance through the attention paid to them across time. The cave's physical properties are unchanged by this attention, but its cultural meaning is entirely created by it, exists only because humans have repeatedly found the cave significant, have created art in response to it, have visited and written and taught about it, have maintained it as a place that matters. In the darkness, in the absence of human witnesses, the cave returns to its own existence, exists purely as physics and geology, as stone and water and sound operating according to natural law. But even in this darkness, even in this solitude, the cave carries its human significance with it, remains inscribed in cultural memory, remains connected to Mendelssohn's music and to the thousands of visitors who have stood at its entrance, remains part of human consciousness even when no human is present. The significance is real even when not actively perceived, just as your house continues to be your home even when you are not in it, just as relationships continue to exist even when the people involved are apart. Dawn will come to Staffa, as it always does. The light will return, will illuminate the columns once more, will make visible what darkness concealed. Boats will approach, carrying new visitors who will make the difficult transition from vessel to shore, will walk the causeway, will stand at the cave entrance and look and listen and feel whatever they feel, will add their own experiences to the accumulated history of human response to this place. Some will be moved profoundly, some will be disappointed, most will fall somewhere in between, will find the cave interesting and impressive and worth having seen, will take their photographs and remember the experience with pleasure, if not with life-changing intensity. And somewhere, that same day or some other day, in some concert hall or in some recording, the Hebrides Overture will be performed or played, will sound through spaces far from Scotland, will reach ears that have never heard of Staffa, will move listeners in ways they might not expect and cannot fully explain. The music will do its work, will create meaning and beauty and emotional response, will carry something of the cave within it even as it exists as pure musical structure, will maintain the connection between place and sound that Mendelssohn established nearly 2 centuries ago. The relationship continues, the story goes on, the cave stands and the music sounds, and humans continue to care about both, continue to find in them something valuable, something worth preserving, something worth the effort of protection and maintenance and cultural transmission. This is as much as we can ask, as much as we should expect. Not eternity, nothing human is eternal. Not perfection, neither the cave nor our pair of it is perfect, but continuity,
commitment, attention, care. These we can provide, these we can maintain, these we can pass forward to future generations along with the cave and the music themselves. And perhaps in the end, that is the deepest meaning of Fingal's cave and the Hebrides Overture. Not any particular interpretation, not any specific significance, but rather the demonstration that meaning can be created and maintained, that beauty can be perceived and preserved, that the human capacity to respond to the world with wonder and creativity and care is real and valuable and worth celebrating. The cave and the music are one example, one instance, one particular manifestation of this larger truth, but they are a beautiful example, a clear instance, a particularly moving manifestation. The stone and the sound continue together, partners in meaning, collaborators in the creation of significance, reminders that we live in a world that is both matter and meaning, both physical and cultural, both indifferent to our concerns and responsive to our attention. This is the world we inhabit, the only world we have, the world that includes both Fingal's cave and the Hebrides Overture, both volcanic basalt and musical genius, both ancient geological processes and recent human creativity. It is a world worth paying attention to, worth caring about, worth working to preserve and protect. The cave and the music together teach us this. They teach us to look and listen carefully, to respond with our full capacity for perception and interpretation, to create meaning from our encounters with both nature and art, to maintain what is valuable, to pass forward what is precious, to participate in the ongoing work of creating and maintaining the cultures that make us human. The waves crash, the columns stand, the music plays, and we, witnesses and participants, observers and creators, continue our work of paying attention, of caring, of maintaining connection between past and present and future, of ensuring that places like Fingal's cave and artworks like the Hebrides Overture remain part of our shared human heritage, accessible to future generations, preserved not just as physical objects, but as living sources of meaning and beauty and wonder.